No shouting, no broken glass, no desperate accusations echoing through the apartment. When Jonathan Reeves discovered his wife was sleeping with another man, he didn't confront her. He helped her fall in love with him. The apartment overlooked the Hudson, its floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting a version of life that looked almost cinematic. Soft jazz hummed in the background, a curated playlist Elena had built years ago when they still hosted dinner parties, when laughter came easily, when silence didn't feel like a third presence in the room. Jonathan stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled to his forearms, pouring himself a glass of bourbon he didn't intend to drink. Elena was late again. Not unusually late, just late enough to be explainable. That had become the pattern, explainable. Everything about their life remained explainable. That was the problem. At 8:47 p.m., the front door clicked open. "You're still up?" Elena called out, her voice light, almost rehearsed. Jonathan didn't answer immediately. He watched her reflection in the window as she stepped inside, heels in hand, hair slightly undone, lipstick faded but not gone. Details. It was always the details. "I had some work," he said finally, turning toward her with a small, polite smile. Elena smiled back, crossing the room to kiss his cheek. It was quick, familiar, empty in a way that neither of them acknowledged. "You should rest more," she said, placing her bag on the counter. "You've been working too much lately." He almost laughed. Instead, he took a sip of bourbon. "You too." Their eyes met briefly, then broke apart. Later that night, Jonathan sat alone in the living room, Elena already asleep behind the half-closed bedroom door. Her phone lit up on the coffee table, a single notification. He didn't mean to look. That's what he would tell himself later, but the truth was quieter, more honest. He had been waiting for something to confirm what he already felt. A name appeared on the screen. Ryan. No last name, no context, just, "I miss you already." Jonathan stared at the message for a long time, not because it shocked him, but because it didn't. His chest didn't tighten, his breath didn't hitch. There was no cinematic collapse, no dramatic realization. Only a slow, almost clinical understanding settling into place. Of course it had happened this way. He picked up the phone, his movements calm, almost detached. The passcode was still the same, Elena had never changed it. That hurt more than the message itself. The conversations were not long, not poetic, not even particularly careful. Fragments of longing, complaints about work, occasional jokes, small pieces of a life that didn't include him. And then there were the gaps, the spaces between messages. Those told the real story. Jonathan placed the phone back exactly where it had been. He leaned back into the couch, eyes fixed on the ceiling. There it was. The truth. Simple. Undeniable. Quiet. His wife was in love with someone else. The next morning unfolded like every other. Elena moved through the kitchen in soft, efficient motions, making coffee, checking emails, adjusting her schedule out loud as if narrating her own life. "I might have a late meeting tonight," she said casually. "Campaign launch is coming up." Jonathan nodded, scrolling through his tablet. "Of course." She hesitated for a fraction of a second, just enough to be noticed. "Is that okay?" Jonathan looked up at her, really looked this time. There was something fragile beneath her composure. Not guilt exactly, but something adjacent to it. Fear, maybe, or anticipation. "It's your job," he said gently. "I trust you." The words landed between them like something fragile. Elena smiled, relieved. "Thank you." At his law firm, Jonathan functioned flawlessly. Meetings, contracts, negotiations, precision defined him. Control defined him. No one noticed anything different. Why would they? He wasn't falling apart. He was thinking. That was the dangerous part. That evening, he didn't go home right away. Instead, he sat in his car outside Elena's office building. The city moved around him in restless waves of light and noise. At 7:12 p.m., he saw her. Elena stepped out of the building, laughing. Not the polite laugh she gave him, not the restrained version she wore at dinners. This was something else, unfiltered, alive. And beside her, a man Jonathan had never seen before. Ryan. He knew instantly. There was no need for confirmation. The way Elena leaned slightly toward him, the way Ryan's hand hovered just close enough to her back without touching. Intimacy lived in those almost moments. Jonathan watched as they walked down the street together, disappearing into the city like a scene that wasn't meant for him. He didn't follow. He didn't need to. Because in that moment, something inside him shifted. Not breaking, not collapsing, aligning. A decision, quiet and irreversible, began to take shape. When Jonathan finally returned home, the apartment felt different. Not emptier, just clearer. He poured another glass of bourbon, this time actually drinking it. His reflection stared back at him from the darkened window, calm, composed, unchanged, except for one thing. He understood the game now, and for the first time in weeks, he wasn't reacting, he was planning. The next few days unfolded with a precision that would have impressed anyone who knew Jonathan Reeves. Nothing changed, and that was exactly how he wanted it. Elena still left the apartment every morning at 7:40, coffee in hand, heels clicking against the marble floor like a metronome measuring the rhythm of a life that had not yet admitted its fracture. Jonathan still kissed her goodbye, still said, "Have a good day," still watched her walk out the door, as if nothing inside him had shifted. But something had. Subtly. Irrevocably. He started noticing everything. Not in a paranoid way, in a methodical one. Elena had always been expressive. Her emotions used to sit openly on her face, transparent and easy to read. That was one of the reasons he had fallen in love with her. There was no guessing, no decoding. Now there were layers, carefully managed ones. She smiled the same way, spoke the same way, but her poses had changed. Half seconds too long. Words chosen just a little too carefully. And then there were the absences. Not physical ones, those were still within reason, but emotional absences. Moments where she was present, yet somewhere else entirely. On Thursday evening, Jonathan sat across from her at dinner, a quiet Italian place they had been going to for years. It used to feel like tradition. Now it felt like performance. "Elena," he said casually, cutting into his steak, "how's the campaign going?" She looked up, slightly surprised. "Good. Busy," she replied. "We're working closely with another team now." Jonathan nodded. "Anyone interesting?" The question was light, almost careless, but it landed. Elena hesitated. There it was again, that fraction of a second. "Just the usual," she said, brushing it off with a smile. "You know how it is." Jonathan held her gaze for just a moment longer than necessary, then smiled back. Of course. He didn't push, he didn't need to. Because silence, he was beginning to realize, was far more revealing than confrontation. Later that night, Elena fell asleep quickly, her back turned toward him. Jonathan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The city lights painted faint patterns across the room, shifting with every passing car. He reached for his phone, not hers, his. He opened the blank note and began typing. Not emotions, not accusations, facts. Late meetings increasing, 2 to 3 times per week. Change in tone when mentioning work. Phone always face down. Increased attention to appearance, subtle but consistent. He paused, then added one more line. Ryan. He stared at the name for a long time. It looked ordinary, almost harmless, which made it worse. The confirmation came 2 nights later, not through confrontation, not through confession, but through something quieter, more intimate. Elena was in the shower. The sound of running water filled the apartment, steady and isolating. Her phone buzzed again on the nightstand. Jonathan didn't move at first. He had already seen enough, already understood enough. But something about the timing, the repetition, pulled at him. Slowly he stood, walked into the bedroom, picked up the phone. The screen lit up. This time there was no ambiguity. A message, clear, unfiltered. "Tomorrow, same place. I can't wait to have you to myself again." Jonathan didn't blink. Didn't react. He simply opened the conversation. And this time he read everything. It wasn't love, not in the way Jonathan had once understood it. It was something messier, more impulsive, fragments of stolen time, inside jokes that didn't quite land, conversations that looped around the same themes, desire, frustration, escape. And Elena, she wasn't the woman he knew, or maybe she was, just unfiltered. With Ryan she was lighter, less restrained. She complained about Jonathan, not cruelly, but honestly. "He's always so controlled. Sometimes I feel like I can't reach him. I don't even know what he's thinking anymore." Jonathan exhaled slowly. That part landed, not because it was unfair, but because it was true. The bathroom door opened. Jonathan locked the phone instantly and placed it back exactly where it had been. By the time Elena stepped into the bedroom, wrapped in a towel, he was already sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through emails. "You're still awake?" she asked softly. "Yeah," he replied, not looking up. "Couldn't sleep." She moved around the room casually, unaware or choosing to be. I have that meeting tomorrow, she said. Might be late again. Jonathan nodded. Of course. A beat passed, then another. Elena studied him for a moment. Something flickered in her expression. You've been quiet lately, she said. Jonathan finally looked up, met her eyes, held them. Have I? The question was gentle, neutral, almost curious. Elena hesitated. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe I'm imagining things. Jonathan smiled faintly. Maybe. That night, as Elena slept beside him, Jonathan lay still, eyes open in the darkness. The truth was no longer abstract, no longer a suspicion. It had shape now, details, patterns, a timeline, and strangely, clarity. He didn't feel anger, not the explosive kind. What he felt was something colder, more precise, a quiet understanding of how things had unfolded, of where they had both failed, of what Elena was looking for, and more importantly, of what she thought she had found. The next morning, Jonathan made breakfast. Pancakes, Elena's favorite. She looked genuinely surprised. This is new, she said with a small laugh. Thought I'd try something different, he replied. She watched him carefully. You're in a good mood? Jonathan placed the plate in front of her, smiled. I've just been thinking. About what? He met her eyes again, and for a brief second there was something behind his gaze, something Elena almost recognized, but couldn't name. About what makes people happy, he said. That afternoon, Jonathan sent an email to his assistant, rescheduling several late meetings, clearing his evenings, creating space, not for himself, but for Elena, for Ryan, because Jonathan Reeves had made the decision. He wasn't going to stop the affair, he wasn't going to expose it, he wasn't even going to confront it. He was going to let it grow, carefully, deliberately, until it revealed exactly what it was worth. And this time, he would be watching. It began with small adjustments, so small that to anyone else they would have looked like nothing more than the natural flexibility of a successful man's schedule. But Jonathan Reeves had never believed in coincidences. Not in court, not in life, and certainly not now. On Monday morning, Elena noticed the first shift. You home early tonight? She asked, pausing mid-sip of her coffee. Jonathan nodded, tying his watch with practiced ease. Actually, no, I have a client dinner, he said. Last minute. Elena blinked. Oh, I thought you said last week you were trying to cut back on evening meetings. Jonathan smiled faintly. I was. A bit. Things change. She studied him for a moment, searching for something beneath the surface. But Jonathan had already perfected the art of giving nothing away. By Wednesday, the pattern became clearer. Jonathan was homeless, but not in a careless way, in a deliberate one. His absences were always explained, always reasonable, always aligned with the image of a man deeply committed to his work. He never overdid it, never created suspicion. If anything, he became more attentive when he was home, more present, more understanding. I can stay in tonight, Elena offered one evening, standing near the doorway as Jonathan adjusted his cufflinks. He glanced up. You don't have to. It's fine, she said. We haven't had dinner together in a while. Jonathan stepped closer, his expression softening just enough to feel real. Then we'll plan something this weekend, he said gently. Tonight's important. Another pause. Then, almost as an afterthought, you should go out, relax a little. Elena frowned slightly. Alone? Jonathan gave a small, almost amused smile. You're allowed to have a life outside of me, Elena. The words lingered. Not accusatory, not bitter, but they carried weight. That night, Elena met Ryan. Of course she did. Jonathan didn't need to check, didn't need to follow, because he had already created the conditions for it to happen. But control came with a cost, and Jonathan was beginning to feel it. It showed in the quiet moments, the ones no one else could see. Like when he stood alone in the elevator of his office building, staring at his reflection in the mirrored walls. For a split second, he didn't recognize the man looking back at him. Not because he had changed outwardly, but because of what sat behind his eyes. Calculation, restraint, and something else. Something dangerously close to grief. At work he remained untouchable, sharp, focused, impeccable. But his colleagues began to notice subtle shifts. "You've been taking more evening meetings than usual," his partner Michael remarked casually during a break. Jonathan didn't look up from his documents. "Temporary." Michael smirked. "You? Temporary? That's new." Jonathan allowed himself a faint smile. People adapt. That word stayed with him. Adapt. Was that what he was doing? Or was he unraveling in a way that simply looked controlled from the outside? Thursday evening brought another carefully placed opportunity. Jonathan texted Elena just before 6 p.m. "Running late. Don't wait up." He watched the screen. 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. "Okay, good luck with everything." He stared at the message longer than necessary. Then locked his phone. Across the city, Elena sat in the passenger seat of Ryan's car, her fingers tracing absent patterns against her knee. "You seem distracted," Ryan said, glancing at her briefly. "I'm not," she replied quickly. He smiled, unconvinced. "Is it him?" Elena hesitated. Jonathan's face flickered in her mind. Calm, composed, distant. "I don't know," she admitted. Ryan reached for her hand. "You're here with me." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a reassurance, or maybe a claim. Elena squeezed his hand lightly. "I know." But her voice lacked certainty. Back in his office, Jonathan sat in the dark. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls, glowing with a life that felt both close and unreachable. He wasn't working anymore. The files in front of him remained untouched. Instead, he replayed fragments. Elena's laugh from years ago. The way she used to look at him, fully, without hesitation. The quiet mornings when nothing needed to be said. He closed his eyes, just for a moment. And for the first time since discovering the truth, the calm cracked. Not visibly, not dramatically, but internally. A slow, almost imperceptible fracture. "Why?" he whispered to no one. The question wasn't angry. It wasn't even accusatory. It was searching, trying to understand something that logic alone couldn't solve. His phone buzzed. A message from Elena. "Are you still at work?" Jonathan stared at it, then typed back, "Yes." A pause. Then another message came through. "Don't stay too late." He exhaled quietly. Even now there was care in her words, or at least the memory of it. Later that night, when Jonathan finally returned home, Elena was already in bed, awake, the lamp beside her casting a soft glow across the room. "You're back," she said softly. "Yeah." He loosened his tie, moving slowly, deliberately. "How was your night?" The question hung in the air, simple, harmless, loaded. Elena looked at him carefully. "Fine," she said. Jonathan nodded. "Good." He changed in silence, slipping into bed beside her. The space between them felt measured, not accidental, not unconscious, chosen. "Jonathan," Elena whispered after a moment. Are we okay?" There it was, the first real crack. Jonathan stared up at the ceiling, considering, choosing. "Yes," he said finally. "Calm, steady. We're fine." Elena turned slightly toward him, searching his face in the dim light. "You feel far away," she said. Jonathan turned his head, meeting her gaze. For a brief second, everything sat there. The truth, the betrayal, the quiet strategy unfolding beneath the surface. But none of it reached his expression. "I'm right here," he said. Elena studied him a moment longer, then nodded, as if convincing herself. "Okay," she turned away, closing her eyes. Jonathan didn't. He lay awake long after her breathing softened into sleep, staring into the darkness, listening to the silence, feeling the weight of every choice he was making. Because this wasn't indifference. It wasn't detachment. It wasn't even forgiveness. It was something far more dangerous. He was letting her go, without telling her she was already gone. And with every passing day, it was becoming harder to tell whether he was still in control or simply watching the slow collapse of something he no longer knew how to save. Elena stopped thinking of it as a mistake. That was the first change. Not a sudden one, not a conscious decision, but somewhere between late-night messages and stolen evenings, the narrative inside her mind began to shift. Mistakes were temporary. This, whatever this was, had begun to feel sustained, alive. It lived in the spaces between her days, in the quiet buzz of her phone during meetings, in the subtle lift of her chest when Ryan's name appeared on the screen. in the way time seemed to bend when she was with him, stretching just enough to feel dangerous, but never enough to feel safe. "Are you even listening to me?" Elena blinked, pulled abruptly back into the conference room. Her colleague stared at her expectantly. "Sorry," she said quickly, straightening in her chair. "Can you repeat that?" A few polite smiles, a few exchanged glances, nothing overt, but enough. Elena forced herself to focus, pushing everything else down, compartmentalizing the way she always had. That was her strength, control, balance. Except now, there were too many things to hold. That evening she met Ryan again, a hotel this time. Not out of necessity, out of convenience. Neutral ground. That's what she taught herself. Ryan opened the door before she even knocked. "You made it," he said, pulling her inside with an ease that felt both comforting and dangerous. Elena laughed softly, though there was tension behind it. "I said I would." He studied her for a moment. "You've been distant." The words caught her off guard. "I've been busy." "That's not what I mean." Ryan stepped closer, his voice lowering slightly. "You're here, but you're not always here." Elena looked away, because he wasn't wrong. Jonathan had begun to exist everywhere. Not physically, but psychologically. In the way he spoke, in the way he watched her, in the way he didn't react. "I think he knows," Elena said suddenly. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Ryan frowned. "Knows what?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Nothing. I'm overthinking." Ryan didn't look convinced. "Elena, he doesn't act like someone who knows," she added quickly. "That's the thing. He's calm. Too calm." The word echoed in her mind. Ryan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Then maybe he doesn't know." Elena looked at him. "Or maybe he does," she said quietly, "and just doesn't care." The thought landed heavier than she expected, because somehow that possibility hurt more. Back at the apartment, Jonathan sat in the living room, a book open in his hands, unread. The clock ticked steadily on the wall. 10:12 p.m., 10:47 p.m., 11:26 p.m. The door finally opened at 11:58. Elena stepped inside, moving quietly, almost cautiously. "You're still awake?" she asked, her voice soft. Jonathan looked up, as if mildly surprised. "Couldn't sleep." She nodded, slipping off her heels. "Long day. He closed the book gently. "How was it?" Elena froze for half a second, then recovered. "Productive." Jonathan held her gaze. Not intensely, not accusingly, just present. "I'm glad." She walked toward the bedroom, then paused. "Jonathan?" "Yes?" She turned back to him, studying his face like she was trying to solve something invisible. "Do you ever feel like something's off?" Jonathan tilted his head slightly. "In what way?" Elena struggled for the words. "I don't know, just things feel different." There it was, not a confession, but close. Jonathan considered her carefully. This was the moment, a fragile opening, a chance to end everything, or begin something else. "People change," he said calmly. The answer was simple, too simple. Elena frowned slightly. "That's it?" Jonathan gave a faint, almost apologetic smile. What else would it be? She didn't answer, because she didn't know. And that uncertainty, it followed her into the bedroom, into the shower, into the quiet moments where her mind refused to settle. Jonathan remained in the living room long after she disappeared, his expression unreadable. But inside, the conflict was no longer quiet. He had expected anger, expected resentment, expected something sharp, something clear. Instead, what he felt was erosion, slow, persistent, a wearing down of something he had once believed was unbreakable. And yet, he kept going. The next weekend, Jonathan suggested something unexpected. "You should go away for a couple of days," he said over breakfast. Elena looked up, confused. "Away?" "Yeah, take a break. You've been stressed." She studied him carefully. "Are you coming with me?" Jonathan shook his head. "I can't. Work." "Of course, work. Always the perfect excuse." Elena's chest tightened slightly. "You're sure?" Jonathan met her eyes, steady, reassuring. "Of course." A pause. Then, almost deliberately, "You could invite someone." The suggestion lingered in the air. Heavy, dangerous. Elena forced a small laugh. "Like who?" Jonathan shrugged lightly. "A friend." The word was neutral, harmless, but it landed like something else entirely. That night, Elena stared at her phone for a long time, Ryan's name at the top of the screen. Her thumb hovered, hesitating. Then, she typed, "Do you want to get away this weekend?" The reply came almost instantly. "With you? Always." Across the apartment, Jonathan stood by the window, looking out at the city. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, calm, controlled, unmoved, but his hand, resting lightly against the edge of the table, tightened, just slightly, because the line had been crossed, not by Elena, not by Ryan, but by him. He wasn't just allowing it anymore. He was building it. And somewhere, deep beneath the strategy, beneath the control, beneath the carefully constructed calm, a question began to take root. When this was over, what, exactly, would be left of him? By the time Friday arrived, Elena had already convinced herself it was her idea. That was the most dangerous part. Not the lie, but how easily it became the truth. "You should leave early," Jonathan said that morning, barely glancing up from his tablet. "Beat the traffic." Elena paused near the kitchen island, keys in hand. "I thought you had a call at 9. "I do." His tone was casual, effortless. "I'll manage." She watched him for a moment. There was something almost generous in the way he said it. Not distant, not cold, just permissive. "Thanks," she said quietly. Jonathan nodded. "Enjoy your weekend." The words settled into her chest with an unexpected lightness. Enjoy. Not be careful. Not call me. Not I'll miss you. Freedom, she realized, didn't always feel like breaking away. Sometimes it felt like being released. The drive out of the city was smoother than expected. Elena kept the window slightly open, letting the wind carry away the tightness that had been building inside her all week. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder. "Ryan, already on my way. You?" She smiled, a reflex she no longer questioned. Almost there. The lake house wasn't hers, or his. It belonged to one of Ryan's friends, empty for the weekend, quiet, removed from everything that made their lives complicated. When Elena arrived, Ryan was already outside, leaning casually against the porch railing. He straightened as soon as he saw her. That was fast. She stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching softly beneath her heels. "I had a head start." Ryan smirked. "Your husband suddenly less controlling?" The word caught her off guard. "Jonathan isn't controlling," she said automatically. Ryan raised an eyebrow. "No?" Elena hesitated, because the truth was more complicated than that. Jonathan wasn't controlling. He was composed, predictable, careful, and lately, strangely absent. "He just trusts me," she said finally. Ryan studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Lucky me." Inside, the house smelled faintly of wood and something older, like time itself had slowed down here. Elena set her back down, walking toward the large windows overlooking the lake. It was quiet. Too quiet. No city noise, no constant movement, just stillness. Ryan came up behind her, his presence warm, immediate. "You okay?" She nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." "About him?" Elena didn't answer, because even here, even now, Jonathan lingered. That night, they sat on the porch, a bottle of wine between them, the lake reflecting fragments of moonlight like broken glass. Ryan leaned back in his chair, watching her. "You're different here," he said. Elena glanced at him. "How?" "Lighter." She smiled faintly. "Maybe because nothing's expected of me here." Ryan tilted his head. "Nothing?" Elena exhaled slowly. "No roles, no routines, no pretending." The word slipped out before she could stop it. Ryan sat up slightly. "Pretending?" She shook her head. "I didn't mean—" "You don't have to explain," he interrupted gently. A pause, then softer. "You don't have to be anyone else with me." That should have comforted her. Instead, it unsettled her, because she wasn't entirely sure who she was being anymore. Back in the city, Jonathan sat alone at the dining table. The apartment felt larger without her, not emptier, just more honest. He hadn't asked where she was going, hadn't asked who she was with, because he already knew, and more importantly, he had made it possible. His phone remained silent. No messages, no updates, no need. Jonathan poured himself a drink, letting the quiet settle around him. This was what he had wanted. Clarity, distance, truth, stripped of illusion. So why did it feel like something was slowly tightening inside his chest? He stood, walking toward the bedroom. Elena's side of the closet was slightly open. He pushed the door wider, his eyes scanning the familiar arrangement of her things. Everything still in place. Everything still hers. Except it wasn't. Not entirely. Not anymore. Jonathan reached out, brushing his fingers lightly against one of her dresses. A simple gesture, but it lingered. He closed the closet, stepped back, and exhaled. Across the lake, Elena lay awake beside Ryan. The room was dark, the air thick with the quiet aftermath of something that should have felt certain. Ryan's arm rested loosely around her, comfortable, familiar. "You're thinking again," he murmured. Elena stared at the ceiling. "Am I that obvious?" "A little," she smiled faintly. Then, "Do you ever wonder if we're just escaping something?" Ryan shifted slightly, propping himself up on one elbow. "Does it matter?" Elena turned her head, looking at him. "Yes." A pause. "Because escaping isn't the same as choosing." Ryan held her gaze. "This feels like a choice to me." Elena studied his face. Sincere, confident, certain. And for a moment, she believed him, because believing was easier. "I want this," she said quietly. The words felt real, solid, like something she could hold on to. Ryan smiled. "Then that's all that matters." Elena nodded slowly, letting the thought settle, letting it take shape, letting it become truth. Back in the city, Jonathan stood by the window again. The same place, the same view, the same reflection staring back at him. Except now, there was something else beneath it. Not doubt, not regret, but the faint, unmistakable awareness that the line between control and loss had begun to blur. Because the more Elena believed she was choosing her own path, the closer Jonathan was getting to the moment where he would have to face the consequence of letting her go. And for the first time, he wasn't entirely sure which part of this had been the plan, and which part had become something else entirely. The illusion didn't shatter all at once. It thinned, gradually, like glass under pressure, still intact, still reflective, but no longer strong enough to hold what it once carried. It started with something small, almost insignificant. "Can you not check your phone for 5 minutes?" Elena looked up, slightly startled. They were back in the city now, back in reality. Ryan sat across from her in a dimly lit bar, his expression edged with something unfamiliar. Irritation. "I wasn't," she began. "You were," he cut in, not harshly, but firmly enough to shift the air between them. Elena frowned, placing her phone face down on the table. "Sorry." Ryan leaned back, exhaling. I don't like feeling like I'm competing for your attention." The irony landed instantly. Elena almost laughed. But she didn't, because for the first time, she saw it. Not Jonathan, not the marriage, but Ryan, clearly. "You're not competing," she said quietly. Ryan had her gaze. "Aren't I?" The question lingered longer than it should have, because neither of them had a clean answer. Later that night, as they walked down the street, the silence between them felt different. Not heavy, not tense, just less certain. "You've changed," Ryan said suddenly. Elena stopped. "What does that mean?" He turned to face her, hands in his pockets. "You were lighter before, less complicated." The words stung more than she expected. "Complicated?" she repeated. Ryan shrugged. "I don't know. You overthink everything now." Elena stared at him, a strange, quiet realization forming. This was the part no one talked about. The after. The reality that followed the escape. "I didn't realize simplicity was the goal," she said, her voice calm but distant. Ryan sighed. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" He hesitated, and in that hesitation, something cracked. "I just thought," he started, then stopped. "What?" Elena pressed. Ryan looked away briefly. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. It was expectation. Unspoken, unacknowledged, but there. Elena felt it settle into her chest, heavier than she expected. Because suddenly, this didn't feel like freedom anymore. It felt like another version of something she had tried to leave behind. That night, she went home. Not to Ryan, to Jonathan. The apartment was quiet when she walked in, lights dim, everything in its place, unchanged. Jonathan sat at the dining table, reading. Of course he was. "You're back early," he said without looking up. Elena froze slightly. "I thought you had a late meeting." Jonathan turned the page. "It got cancelled." A pause. Then, "How was your night?" The question felt different now, sharper, not because of how he asked it, but because of how she heard it. "Fine," she said. Jonathan nodded. "Good." Elena stood there for a moment longer than necessary, waiting for something, a reaction, a question, anything. But Jonathan simply closed his book and stood. "I'm going to get some sleep," he said calmly. "You should too." And just like that, he walked past her. Elena turned slowly, watching him disappear into the bedroom. Her chest tightened. This wasn't indifference. It was something else. Distance. Measured. Intentional. And suddenly, she missed him. Not the routine. Not the marriage. Him. The way he used to look at her like she was something worth understanding. The way his silence used to feel safe, not empty. The way his presence used to ground her, not drift past her like something untouchable. Elena exhaled slowly, leaning against the wall. What had she done? In the bedroom, Jonathan stood by the window, staring out at the city. He had heard her come in. He had heard the hesitation in her voice. He had felt the shift. The cracks had started, right on time. But there was no satisfaction in it, no sense of victory. Only a quiet, hollow awareness that something irreversible was already in motion. His phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. A message from his assistant. A confirmation. Everything was ready. Jonathan stared at the screen for a long moment, then locked it. Behind him, the door opened slightly. "Elena?" Her voice was softer now. "Careful." "Yes," he replied without turning. The pause. Then, "Are we okay?" The same question, but it sounded different this time. Less uncertain, more afraid. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly, just for a second. This was the moment where he could stop, turn around, say everything, break the silence. But he didn't. Instead, he opened his eyes, steady, resolved. "We are fine," he said. Elena stood there, watching him, waiting, but nothing else came, and slowly she nodded. "Okay." She turned away. Jonathan remained where he was, unmoving, because the truth was they were no longer breaking. They had already broken. Now they were just living in the aftermath. And Jonathan was almost ready to end it. Jonathan chose a Tuesday, not because it meant anything, but because it didn't. There was something almost poetic about ending a marriage on an ordinary day. No anniversaries, no symbolic dates, no emotional weight to lean on. Just truth, stripped of excuses. "Elena, can you be home early tonight?" The message appeared on her screen at 3:18 p.m. She stared at it longer than necessary. Jonathan rarely asked for anything. That alone was enough to unsettle her. "Is everything okay?" she typed back. The reply came a minute later. "Yes, I just think we should talk." Talk. Such a simple word. And yet, it carried a quiet finality that she couldn't ignore. The rest of her day blurred. Meetings passed without meaning. Voices became background noise. Even Ryan's message, "Dinner tonight?" felt distant. She didn't reply. When Elena stepped into the apartment that evening, the silence greeted her first. Not the usual quiet. Something more deliberate. Jonathan was already there, sitting at the dining table, waiting. For a moment she just stood by the door, taking him in. The way he sat, calm, composed, almost unnervingly still, like a man who had already reached the end of something. "You're home early," she said, her voice softer than intended. Jonathan nodded. "So are you." She set her back down slowly, her movements careful, measured. "What did you want to talk about?" Jonathan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." The word wasn't harsh, but it wasn't a suggestion either. Elena sat, her hands folded instinctively in her lap. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jonathan reached into his jacket pocket and placed something on the table. A phone. Her phone. Elena's breath caught. "I believe this is yours," he said calmly. The room shifted, not visibly, but internally, like the ground beneath her had quietly disappeared. "I didn't mean to look at it," Jonathan continued. His voice was even, controlled. "Not at first." Elena stared at the phone, unable to move, unable to speak. "But I'm glad I did." The words landed gently, which made them worse. "How long?" she whispered. Jonathan leaned back slightly, studying her. "Long enough." Tears gathered in her eyes almost instantly. Not dramatic, not explosive, just inevitable. "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked, her voice breaking. Jonathan held her gaze, and for the first time there was something behind his calm. Not anger, not pain, Something deeper. Because I wanted to understand, he said. Elena shook her head, struggling to process. Understand what? You. The answer was immediate, uncomplicated, and devastating. Silence filled the space between them again. Thick, unavoidable. I thought about confronting you, Jonathan continued, ending it immediately, demanding answers. A faint pause. But that wouldn't have told me anything real. Elena's chest tightened. What are you saying? Jonathan leaned forward slightly, his eyes steady, unwavering. I'm saying, I didn't stop you. The words didn't make sense at first. They hovered in the air, disconnected from meaning. Then slowly, they did. Elena blinked, confusion shifting into something sharper, more terrifying. What do you mean? She asked. Jonathan exhaled quietly. I adjusted my schedule, he said. I gave you space. I made it easier for you to see him. Each sentence landed like a quiet udar. Not loud, not violent, but precise. Elena stared at him, her mind racing backward, replaying everything. The late meetings, the sudden freedom, the weekend, the lake house. Her breath became uneven. No, she whispered. Jonathan didn't look away. Yes. The truth settled in, heavy, unforgiving. You knew? Her voice cracked. The whole time? Jonathan nodded once. And you just... what? Watched? She demanded, her voice rising now. I paid attention, he corrected calmly. Elena stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. This isn't normal, Jonathan. This is... She couldn't finish. Because there was no word for it. You let me do this, she said finally, her voice trembling. Jonathan stood as well, slowly, measured. No, he said. You chose to. The distinction cut deeper than anything else. Tears spilled freely now. You helped me, she said, almost accusingly. Jonathan didn't deny it. Yes. The honesty was unbearable. Why? She demanded. Why would you do that? For the first time, Jonathan hesitated. Not because he didn't have an answer, but because it mattered. Because if I stopped you, he said quietly, you would have stayed for the wrong reasons. Elena froze. I needed to see if you would choose him, even when you didn't have to. The room went still. And you did. The words were soft, final, irreversible. Elena shook her head, stepping back as if distance could undo what she was hearing. I didn't know, she whispered. I thought I was in control. Jonathan finished gently. She looked at him. Broken. Yes. Jonathan gave a faint, almost sad smile. That's the illusion, he said. Silence swallowed the room again. Everything Elena believed about the past weeks, every choice, every moment of freedom, collapsed inward. It hadn't been freedom. It had been exposure. You manipulated everything, she said hollowly. Jonathan shook his head. No. A pause. I revealed it. The difference was subtle, but absolute. Elena sank back into the chair, her strength dissolving beneath her. I didn't think it would feel like this, she admitted quietly. Jonathan watched her. Neither did I. Another pause. Longer this time. Do you love him? Jonathan asked. The question was simple, but it carried the weight of everything. Elena opened her mouth, then closed it, because for the first time, she didn't know. I thought I did, she said finally. Jonathan nodded slowly. That's enough. Elena looked up at him, panic rising again. What does that mean? Jonathan reached for his jacket. Calm, decisive. It means we're done. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They settled. Permanent. You're just leaving? Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan looked at her one last time. Really looked. Not with anger, not with resentment, but with something quieter, understanding. I already did, he said softly. And with that, he walked past her. This time, he didn't look back. Elena remained where she was, frozen in the aftermath. Because the worst part wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't even the loss. It was the realization that every step she thought she had taken freely had led her exactly where she was now, alone. The apartment didn't feel empty after Jonathan left. It felt exposed. Elena remained seated at the dining table long after the door had closed behind him. She didn't move, didn't cry, didn't even try to understand what had just happened. Because understanding required distance, and she was still inside it. The silence pressed in from all sides. Not the familiar quiet of late nights or early mornings. This was something else. A silence that carried absence. Finality. Jonathan's glass still sat on the table, half full, untouched since earlier. She stared at it as if it might offer an explanation. It didn't. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had lost its shape. Eventually, Elena stood, her legs unsteady, like she had forgotten how to carry her own weight. She walked slowly through the apartment. Everything was still there. The furniture, the photographs, the carefully curated life they had built together. Except now, every object felt like evidence. She stopped in front of a framed photo near the hallway, taken years ago, a summer afternoon. Jonathan beside her, his arm resting lightly around her shoulders. Both of them smiling, not for the camera, but at each other. Elena reached out, her fingers brushing the glass. "I didn't see it," she whispered. But the truth came quietly, without resistance. She had seen the distance, felt the silence, noticed the slow erosion of something that once felt solid. She just hadn't chosen to stop it. Her phone buzzed. The sound cut sharply through the stillness. Ryan. She stared at his name on the screen, for a long time. Then she answered. "Hey," his voice came through, casual, warm. "I was starting to think you disappeared." Elena closed her eyes briefly. "I need to see you." An hour later, she stood outside his apartment. This time, there was no hesitation when he opened the door. "You okay?" Ryan asked immediately, his expression shifting when he saw her face. Elena stepped inside without answering. The space felt smaller than she remembered, or maybe she just saw it differently now. "What happened?" he pressed. She turned to him, her voice steady, too steady. "He knows." Ryan froze. "What?" "He's known," she corrected, "for a while." The words settled heavily between them. Ryan ran a hand through his hair. Okay, we'll figure this out." Elena watched him, really watched him. The confidence in his voice, the quick shift into problem solving, the assumption that this was something manageable, and suddenly it felt unfamiliar. "He left," she said. Ryan blinked. "Left, like tonight?" Elena nodded. Silence stretched. Ryan exhaled slowly. "All right," he said. "Then maybe this is a good thing." The words landed wrong. "A good thing?" Elena repeated. "Yeah," he said, stepping closer. "Now we don't have to hide anymore." "Hide?" Elena felt something inside her shift. Not breaking, not collapsing, just realigning. "That's what you think this is?" she asked quietly. Ryan frowned. What else would it be? Elena let out a soft, almost disbelieving breath, because for the first time she saw the difference. Jonathan had understood the weight of what was happening, the consequences, the meaning behind every choice. Ryan, he only understood the outcome. "This isn't freedom," she said. Ryan's expression hardened slightly. "Elena, I lost my husband," she continued. "My marriage, my life." "You were already losing that," Ryan countered. The certainty in his voice felt sharp now, simplistic. "No," Elena said. "I was walking away from it." A pause. "There's a difference." Ryan studied her, something flickering behind his eyes, something less certain than before. "So what are you saying?" he asked. Elena hesitated, because the answer wasn't easy. It wasn't clean. "I don't know," she admitted, and that was the most honest thing she had said in weeks. Ryan stepped back slightly, frustration beginning to surface. "You don't know?" he repeated. Elena shook her head. "I thought I did." Silence filled the room again, but this time it wasn't comfortable, because the illusion was gone. Ryan wasn't a fantasy anymore, he was real. And reality was never as simple as escape. "I think you should go," Elena said softly. Ryan stared at her. "Are you serious?" She nodded. "I need to be alone." For a moment, it looked like he might argue, push, fight for something that had once felt effortless, but he didn't. "Fine," he said finally. And just like that, the distance began. Later that night, Elena returned to the apartment. It felt different now, not just empty, not just quiet, but irreversible. She walked into the bedroom slowly, Jonathan's side of the closet half empty. Not everything, just enough, enough to make it real. Elena sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting in her lap. No tears came this time, because regret didn't always look like grief. Sometimes it looked like clarity. Weeks passed, the divorce was quiet, efficient, exactly like Jonathan. No arguments, no drawn-out conflict, no attempts to revisit what had already been decided. He didn't fight her, didn't punish her, didn't even ask for explanations. He simply let go. And somehow, that hurt more than anything else. Elena saw Ryan a few more times, each meeting shorter than the last, the conversations thinner, the connection weaker, until eventually there was nothing left to hold on to. Ryan became what he had always been, a moment, not a future. One evening, months later, Elena stood by the same window Jonathan used to stand at. The city stretched endlessly before her, unchanged, unforgiving. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, different now, not because of what she had lost, but because of what she understood. Love wasn't just about feeling, it was about choosing, again and again, even when it was difficult, even when it was quiet. And she had chosen something else. Now, she had to live with it. Somewhere across the city, Jonathan walked alone down a quiet street. No destination, no urgency, just movement. He didn't look back. Not because he didn't care, but because he already knew some things, once broken in silence, were never meant to be rebuilt.